We were young, we were wrong, we're right all along. And if there's somebody carrying me on, she's the one. And if there's somebody, and we got some fuck cutting us off, there's somebody carrying me on, she's the one. Hello! Hi guys! How are you doing? This is Speedy here, coming to you guys from a hot rainforest called Toronto. Whew. Anybody who's ever been to Toronto knows exactly what I mean in July. It's a nice big hot swamp. Whew. Toasty as fuck, man. What's this bus gonna do? It's just going in that one. Good boy, good boy, good boy. Alright. And well, the evening is a-coming, so I'm a-riding. Because it should cool down at least to like the low 20s at night, so won't be too bad. I mean Celsius, of course. But yeah, like much cooler at night. Thank God. Man, today, like the last. That's awkward. The last night. It's just weird when you're talking to yourself and stand still because everyone can see you talking to yourself, and it's kind of like, what the fuck's this guy doing? It's kind of like that Bluetooth scenario, you know, when you're in the grocery store or the mall or whatever, and you got somebody yelling, "Oh yeah, I said fucking blue cheese, oh yeah, yeah," and it's like, oh yeah. Man, I'm like permanently dehydrated, and whenever I drink liquids, they're always hot because they don't stay cold for very long. But anyways, yeah, like today it's like 30 something with the humidity, it's like, fuck off, 39. Get away from that bus. Ah, bug in my eye. Today I'm going to be talking about, I feel like I'm gonna be doing a little bit of a psychology topic. This might ruffle some feathers, but you know what? I don't care. Is my opinion. And in fact, a lot of what I'm talking about is coming from a documentary I watched a while back. It's called Zeitgeist Moving Forward. And the first half of the movie is about this. It's about addictions. The root of it. It's about addictions, about mental health problems. And anything else that can be related to genetics, so health problems like heart problems, cancer, diabetes, all of that stuff that can be related to this. Now there's this big idea in the scientific community and the public at large that genetics are a predetermination almost. Like people think that if you are genetically predispositioned to have, let's say diabetes, heart disease, or a mental health problem or an addiction, people seem to think that means you're going to get it. But there's actually a lot of evidence that shows to the contrary. And you can't ignore biology when it comes to biology and environment, when it comes to health problems, mental health problems, etc. You just can't ignore it. So, like, to give you an example of what I'm talking about. Okay guys, the light's been green a while. That means is even if you have the gene for one of these problems, you can overcome that gene. You can actually overcome it. So for example, if you have a heart problem, if you're predisposed to having heart problems, you can eat a better diet. And you can actually have less chance of getting heart disease than somebody who doesn't have that gene if you eat a better diet, for example. However, if you think, oh, well, I'm predisposed to get heart disease, for example, why even bother to change my diet, my lifestyle? Why bother exercising, eating healthy? I'm going to get it anyways. If you have this defeatist attitude, you're going to, of course you're going to get it. But it's not because your genetics, because you didn't change your diet, you see? It's not, genetics are not a sole determinator. They're not. There's no such thing as a determinating gene. It just means your predisposition if you don't do something about it. Or like if so, for example, with health, well, that's obvious. Just eat a healthy diet, exercise, and yeah. And just because you don't have a gene for, let's say, heart disease, doesn't mean you're not going to get it, or diabetes. If you eat unhealthy, you can have a higher chance of getting diabetes than somebody who has a genetic predisposition to having diabetes or heart disease. So people say, oh, I'm skinny, nobody in my family has diabetes, I can eat whatever the hell I want. That's really not a smart idea. Okay? And I mean, when it comes to other things, like mental health problems, addictions, you know, I think it's a very demeaning thing to say, well, you're genetically predispositioned to have these problems, and so it's like your fault. It's you're born with these genes, you know? It's such an elitist and defeatist attitude, and like it's you know, you're actually putting down people with these problems, you know? It's not fair to them. And you don't really understand the root cause of it. Also, like when it comes to mental health problems, you cannot ignore environment. Like when it comes to like mental health problems and addictions, you can't ignore upbringing, you can't ignore parental influence. Because there's studies that show that, for example, see, and like keep this in mind if you ever have kids, you know? If the mother is stressed during, when she's pregnant, there's studies that actually show that the baby... So yeah, you cannot ignore environment when it comes to addiction and mental health problems. So, like for example, there's studies that show that if a mother is stressed when she's pregnant, the fetus can be affected. Like for example, in the late 60s, early 1970s, during the Vietnam War, they found that mothers who were stressed at the time because their husbands were drafted to war, oh my god, how many people are getting killed in accidents tonight, and oh boy. Yeah, anyways, yeah, a lot of they found that that generation of babies that grew up, they actually found that they had a higher incidence of schizophrenia than the rest of the population. Now come on, you can't just say that's genetics. You have to admit that it's because the stress of those mothers who are, you know, having babies in this kind of stressful environment, worrying about their husbands at war and stuff. You know, you can't deny that had an effect on babies from that generation, who were born in that generation. So that's a good example. And another good example would be, and all these examples I'm talking to you about, they're in the documentary Zeitgeist Moving Forward. If you watch the first half I was talking about, Zeitgeist Moving Forward, they found this social worker who was in that movie. He was talking about how most children who have how a lot of people who have addictions, it's because of the relationships they've had with people. A lot of them were actually abused as children. Or either that, or they were just ignored growing up. Like the parents weren't there when they needed them. And as a result, these babies, these children grew up into addicts. It's not just because they had the genes for it, it's because the environment they grew up in, you know. And I guess friendships as well, you know. Maybe they had people who stabbed them in the back, and they felt like they couldn't trust anybody. They felt like the world is a dangerous place. You know, he describes it very well, what it's like for the addict. Either that, or sometimes what happens is they have a traumatic experience, like they witness someone being killed, either murdered, run over by a car, stuff like that, and that does affect people psychologically. I mean, Jim Morrison would be a good example of that. He ended up becoming an alcoholic and having lots of mental health problems, and that's because he saw a Native American being squashed on the road on the highway in New Mexico when he was a child. So there you go. So traumatic experiences can trigger addiction problems later on in life as well. And like I say, if you're going to have a kid, you have to be careful. You have to make sure that you're not stressed, because all that stress will be put onto the baby. The baby will learn that the outside world is a dangerous place. It's a stressful environment. Also, if you're not eating properly, you know, inappropriate levels of nutrients can cause problems. There's just so much involved into child rearing. You have to be careful. You really do. And they also found too that parents, even if they're not abusive towards the children, if they're not there during critical times, when they're a baby, for example, like if say you have a baby who cries in the crib every night, if the parent actually ignores the baby, that baby for the rest of its life will remember. It might not watch it, it won't remember it, like it won't be able to recall it in its mind, because recall memories is only made from age 2. They won't be able to recall it in its mind, but it will remember somehow, like I guess in its subconscious, that, you know, kind of a sense of abandonment, like the parent wasn't there for them. And babies like that are more susceptible to addiction later on, mental health problems as well. So it just goes to show that if you're absent there for the child or a baby when it needs it most, you know, like that can have some dire consequences for the child later on in life. Even when it's a baby, even though it can't recall it in its brain, like I say, somewhere in its subconscious, the brain knows, so to speak, that that sense of abandonment, you know. So, and a lot of parents think, oh, I'm spoiling my baby if I pick it up when it's crying. No, you need to nurture that baby. You need to pick it up and stop it from crying. I mean, the amount of parents I have seen who literally do this, it's ridiculous. Like, I've been in a grocery store. I work in a grocery store, okay, let's say. And, and the other day I saw a baby crying. You know what the parent did? Absolutely nothing. Just let the baby cry. Cry, cry, cry. As it's checking out, price matching its crap. Oh, just let the baby cry. What a bad thing to do to your baby. So I look at the baby, I stare it down in the eyes, think it was a he, and you know, I do a kind of a sad face, like, come on baby, like, why are you crying? And guess what? The baby stopped crying instantly. Why? Because it wanted attention. It needed that attention, and the parent wasn't there. I'm not saying I'd be a perfect parent, but, you know, at least I understand that when a baby's crying, you don't just leave it cry forever. The woman who was there is like, yeah, you're like the baby whisperer or something. Like, wow, it's just like, just stop crying. It's like, it's not magic. It's called paying attention to your child. And when your child asks questions when you're a kid too, you know, try to at least answer those questions. Don't ignore it. I remember growing up, like, for me, like, I'd ask so many questions to my parents and they just say, stop talking. Like, you don't do that to a child, man. Like, you gotta acknowledge it. You gotta acknowledge the questions. You gotta acknowledge, you know, the brain is trying to learn things. But anyways, so yes, so you can't ignore environment when it comes to child rearing. And I mean, when it comes to mental health problems and addictions and stuff like that too, you just can't ignore that kind of stuff. I really recommend all of you to watch that documentary I told you, Zeitgeist Moving Forward. It certainly kind of woke up my mind to genetics and that. I watched it a while ago, but every now and then I'll rewatch it and be like, oh yeah, wow, like, you know. Anyways, thanks for watching, guys. I'm sorry about all the stupid pauses. There's so much traffic, it's hard to think, and it's hot as hell still. So anyways, thanks for watching and have a great night.